In the hours following that attack, false media claims about the perpetrator amplified on social media. The Guardian reported there were at least 27 million impressions of posts on Twitter alone that stated or speculated the suspected attacker was Muslim, a migrant, a refugee or a foreigner. We need to ask ourselves honestly as a society, how long before someone is accepted as being part of our community? How many generations need to have passed before they are fully accepted and welcomed? And if they continue to be othered because of the colour of their skin, their religion or their ethnicity, then let's be clear, that is racism. It is xenophobia. It is Islamophobia. We do so to condemn and offer our solidarity to all those who have been impacted by this racism and violence. And we also want to look forward at what we need to do to tackle the underlying issues which it surfaces. I want to speak mainly in my capacity as an MLA and leader of the Alliance Party, but I do want to finalise some comments as the Minister of Justice. I want to begin, first of all, by condemning absolutely and unequivocally the reprehensible events of the last number of weeks in Antrim and more acutely over the weekend in Belfast and further afield. The actions of a small and violent minority are motivated by a desire to foment hate and division and should be highlighted for what it is: fear-mongering and intimidation at the highest level. Let me say clearly, there is no place in our society for hate, for xenophobia, for racism, for Islamophobia that we have seen on the streets over recent weeks and days. My thoughts are with all of those impacted in this targeted violence and intimidation, and I'd like to say specifically to all those feeling fearful and anxious as a result of what they have seen and experienced over recent days, we stand with you. This violent minority do not represent the people of Northern Ireland. We do in this chamber, and we speak for you as well as for them. I also want to send my thanks to the police officers who have had to respond to the violence and give my best wishes for a speedy recovery to those who have been injured in the line of duty. I'll return to the issue of policing later in my remarks. The most recent unrest we have seen in towns and cities across the UK was, on the face of it, a retaliation to an abhorrent knife attack in Southport. I think I speak for all my colleagues and those from other parties when I say my thoughts are with all those children and their families who were attacked, and my deepest condolences go to the families of the 3 little girls who were murdered: Elsie Stankham, Alice de Silva Aguilar and Baby King. Their loss is unspeakable. In the hours following that attack, false media claims about the perpetrator amplified on social media. The Guardian reported there were at least 27 million impressions of posts on Twitter alone that stated or speculated the suspected attacker was Muslim, a migrant, a refugee or a foreigner. Despite the pleas of the families of those girls for the unrest to stop, their anguish and pain is being exploited by those who are behind these riots. What we're witnessing is a form of radicalisation of people online through disinformation and outright lies propagated by far-right and white supremacist elements, both domestic and international, and it is incredibly dangerous. While people have a right to an opinion when it comes to issues such as immigration, as with any other issue, it needs to be an informed opinion. There have been suggestions from some that this violence is a result of people with genuine concerns about immigration and who were seeking to legitimately protest. Firstly, these demonstrations, as they were advertised, were never intended to be either legitimate or lawful. From the outset, they intended to intimidate and threaten. They intended to break the law on public processions and to block roads. And I believe that they intended to create violence and unrest. Their call for women and children to stand to the front was, in my view, a clear attempt to use them as human shields when violence actually started. They were not, in my view, ever intended to be legitimate. They are hate marches. However, I want to speak beyond those to those people who are genuinely confused, frightened or even angry about immigration, to those who believe that immigrants and asylum seekers are the cause of their own hardship. They are not. Your anger is misdirected. Lack of investment by the last government in public services and housing are the cause, and by taking out your frustrations on others because of their ethnicity, religion, skin colour or more scarce resources are being wasted, and you are being manipulated by far-right groups and social media fakery. As political leaders, it is our role to counter, not amplify, division and disinformation. If you have genuine concerns in our community, raise it with us as your local MLAs. We must also collectively be clear, however, that there is no excuse ever for taking to the streets to intimidate others and create havoc in our community. Some of the people who have been the target of violence in Belfast are only here because they have experienced hardship and abuse that most of us can barely imagine in their home country. They are here to build a better life and to contribute constructively to society. They are here seeking safety, and deserve to live in peace. Others, however, are long-standing members of our community, many second and third generation, who have built businesses, created employment opportunities and provided services to our community for longer than some of the rioters have been alive. We need to ask ourselves honestly as a society, how long before someone is accepted as being part of our community? How many generations need to have passed before they are fully accepted and welcomed? And if they continue to be othered because of the colour of their skin, their religion or their ethnicity, then let's be clear, that is racism. It is xenophobia, it is Islamophobia, and that is not and cannot ever be legitimate, and we need to work collectively as political leaders to combat it. I now want to make some remarks as Justice Minister. Obviously, I was horrified to hear media reports of a man who was attacked in the street on Monday and who is now in a serious condition in hospital after his attacker stamped on his head. I want to send my very best wishes to that man for a speedy recovery. Police say they are treating this incident as a hate crime. Just before recess, I also spoke to the Assembly about my determination to expedite progress on updating our hate crime legislation and strengthening the protections we offer to victims of hate crime. Those recommendations from Judge Marnin's independent review of hate crime legislation in 2020 have provided that impetus for this work. The implementation of these recommendations will make a real and tangible difference for victims of racist hate crimes. The loss of 2 years of Assembly business and the constraint on resources in the Department and the wider justice system has restricted the range of legislative reforms possible in the remainder of this mandate. However, despite those challenges, I am determined that foundational new hate crime legislation provisions will be in place by the end of the mandate. I hope I can rely on the support of colleagues here today in progressing those reforms, which I believe will offer significant assurance and shift the dial on our hate crime response and indeed the conversations in this space. I intend to make a statement in the Assembly setting out the details of my intention following summer recess. The PSNI have had a very difficult task in policing the complex and rapidly evolving events of the last few days. I know that work is ongoing to bring those involved to justice and that they will face the full force of the law. There have already been 16 arrests and 11 people have been charged, and that number is due to rise in the coming days. I have also been aware of work being done with An Garda Síochána to identify those who cross the border to engage in riots in Belfast at the weekend, and I want to thank Minister McEntee for engaging with me on these issues earlier this week. I visited the Belfast Islamic Centre yesterday to hear from some of those affected by this, and I heard very clearly that people have lost confidence in the police, and that concerns me. When I say that lessons will have to be learned, one of those is how to restore that trust and confidence, and I want to pay tribute to the Chief Constable and his officers for the work they are already doing to address those concerns. As I've said many times, policing and justice have not been this stretched since devolution in 2010. Though the total Northern Ireland Block grant has increased by 53% in the last 13 years, DOJ has seen just under 13% growth in budget allocation. Policing makes up around 65% of our budget and so has endured the same sustained and profound squeeze. I say this to demonstrate that there are consequences of these past decisions, some of which were made when the Northern Ireland Block grant was in a much better state than it is today. We know that despite the comparative investment, the health service and education system are still not in a good place. Whilst there are, in my view, structural changes required that partially can deal with this, it is clear that the effects on policing and justice of being actively starved of investment have never really received the same public attention. My colleagues and I have fought for years to highlight the risk in underfunding public services and justice, although sadly it has brought little to the table. But no one could claim to be surprised at the backlog in our courts, that our prisons are full and that our police service is at its lowest ever number of officers. The effect of these numbers in policing, amongst other things, is a lack of resilience. Services get scaled back, particularly work in neighbourhood policing. And when there is a crisis such as unrest as the scale we have witnessed over the past week, it is incredibly hard to manage. I therefore met the Secretary of State on Monday evening and again yesterday morning and was clear that policing needs access to the additional resources and support available to England and Wales during the current unrest and beyond. I also want to welcome and thank the Finance Minister, who has been clear in highlighting the need for further investment in public services across Northern Ireland and continues to fight on behalf of the Executive for the proper funding of our public services, and I continue to support those efforts on behalf of policing and justice. In closing, Mr Speaker, I make two appeals. Firstly, anyone with information about those involved or other planned disturbances, please bring that forward to the police and support us in bringing those responsible to justice. My second appeal, Mr Speaker, is for calm. I am appealing to people to step back, to all of those who have influence to continue to seek to calm tensions and show support for and solidarity with those who are suffering most directly and are impacted most profoundly by this violence and hatred. It is not who we are, and we cannot allow it to be.